The dawn of August 11th, 1942, did not break so much as it seeped into being, a slow and sinister transformation of the sky from star-dusted black to a bruised, sickly palette of purple and indigo. It was a dawn that promised not life, but a long, brutal day of steel and death, a day where the very elements of air and water would be weaponized against the hubris of men. The Mediterranean, off the coast of Algeria, near the great British bastion of Gibraltar, lay unnaturally calm, a sheet of polished obsidian reflecting the ominous heavens. Upon this dark mirror moved a sight to stir both awe and dread. The stark, grey silhouettes of a civilization's last, desperate gamble. This was Operation Pedestal, not merely a convoy but a single straining, pulsating artery struggling to beat its way through a body of water that had become a hostile organism. Its destination a body on the verge of death, the island fortress of Malta. For weeks, the bread ration on the island had been a bitter, gritty concoction of sawdust and despair. The fuel tanks were hollow, echoing ghosts. The anti-aircraft shells were counted out one by one with a grim, ritualistic precision that spoke of a finite and rapidly diminishing endurance. The fate of the entire war in the Mediterranean, and by extension, the crucial North African campaign, where the Foxes Rommel and Montgomery circled each other in the desert, hung in the balance, suspended from the frayed thread of these 14 merchant ships. Their holds were crammed with the lifeblood of modern war, high-octane aviation fuel, crated Spitfires, shells of every caliber, and the simple, profound sustenance of food. Surrounding them was their massive escort, a fleet of over 50 warships, from the majestic flat-topped aircraft carriers that were the new queens of the sea, to the battle-hardened cruisers, down to the darting, pugnacious destroyers and sloops. This armada represented the last, full-throated roar of British naval power in the region, a force pushing eastward into the crucible, a testament to imperial will in the face of overwhelming odds. They were sailing into what the Kriegsmarine had ominously and accurately dubbed the Devil's Garden, a gauntlet of airfields, U-boats, E-boats, and minefields stretching from the Sicilian Narrows to the very battered, bomb-pocked harbours of Valletta. It was a zone where the sea and sky actively conspired to destroy any who dared its passage, a geographic manifestation of total war. And beneath the surface, in the silent, pressure-hulled, and electrically humming world of the Royal Navy's submarines, a different kind of battle was being prepared. A battle of wits, of infinite patience, and of brutal calculated geometry, fought by men who waged war in near-total silence and perpetual, claustrophobic darkness, the unseen guardians of a forlorn hope, the terriers sent to face the wolves, the Mediterranean. In that fateful August of 1942 was more than a body of water. It was the anvil upon which the fate of empires was being hammered out, a liquid continent whose control meant life or death for the armies in the desert. Each ship in the Pedestal convoy was a floating fortress of hope, a tiny, moving castle of defiance, its hull straining not just against the gentle, deceptive swell of the sea, but against the immense, invisible weight of strategic necessity. The island of Malta was a dagger pointed directly at the soft underbelly of the Axis supply lines to North Africa. A stubborn, unsinkable aircraft carrier from which British planes and submarines could ravage the convoys feeding Rommel's panzers, and the enemy was determined to either seize it or twist it out by sheer, unrelenting force. For months, the combined might of the German Luftwaffe and the Italian Regia Aeronautica had thrown everything they had at the island, pummeling its airfields into dust, sinking its supply ships with merciless efficiency in the deadly channels surrounding it, and slowly, methodically starving its people and defenders into submission. The air raids over the convoy were unrelenting, a hellish symphony of screaming Junkers, Ju-87, Stukas that fell from the sky like avenging falcons, and the crump of near misses that sent geysers of white water towering over the beleaguered vessels, soaking the decks and the men who fought there. The sea itself seemed to conspire against them, with U-boats gliding like malevolent shadows through the azure depths, their commanders hunched over charts in their control rooms, calculating intercept courses with cold, mathematical precision, their boats becoming extensions of their own predatory will. The destroyers and frigates of the escort weaved frantic, serpentine patterns around their precious charges, their Azdic pings, a sound like fingernails tapping incessantly on a wet coffin lid, searching the abyss, their depth charges rolling off the stern racks or catapulting from throwers in a desperate, thunderous attempt to keep the wolves at bay. It was a battle of attrition, a brutal slugging match where every mile eastward was paid for in blood, black oil, and the shattered nerves of young men, a testament to the grim, unyielding determination of the Royal Navy and the civilian sailors of the Merchant Marine, who sailed into hell for a pittance and a prayer, their courage the unheralded backbone of the entire enterprise. The primary hunter, the weapon chosen for this most delicate and dangerous of tasks, was the U-class submarine. To the uninitiated, it was a paradox, a submersible designed not for the vast, forgiving hunting grounds of the Atlantic, but for the shallow, bathtub-clear waters of the Mediterranean, where every shadow on the sandy bottom was a potential threat, and the seafloor was an ever-present, crushing danger that could rupture a hull as easily as a depth charge. At just 191 feet long and displacing only 540 tons on the surface, it was dwarfed by the German Type 7s of the Atlantic packs, a terrier facing wolves in a fight where size seemed to be everything. Its 1,500 horsepower diesel engines could only push it to a sluggish 11 knots on the surface, a crawl compared to the 30-knot destroyers it sought to evade, its progress a patient, stealthy stalk rather than a dashing charge. A game of chess played with live ordnance. Its armament was modest, almost meagre. 6 forward torpedo tubes and a mere 4 reloads, supplemented by a single 3-inch deck gun. A pop gun against the might of a battleship, or even a determined escort. On paper, it was a coastal defender, a scout, a submersible of limited reach and power, a compromise born of pre-war budget constraints, and a flawed strategic vision that had failed to anticipate this kind of war. But what the ledger sheets and technical manuals could not capture was its sublime agility and the unique quality of its crews. The U-class was a ballerina in a world of lumbering boxers, a creature of grace and precision in a brutally unforgiving environment. Its small size and incredibly tight turning circle made it exceptionally maneuverable, a critical trait for operating in the confined, treacherously complex waters around Malta and for dodging the relentless, pattern depth charge attacks that followed a failed ambush. Explosions that shook the boat like a dog shaking a rat and tested the sanity of every man aboard. Its very frailty, its lack of the deep-diving capability of its larger cousins, forced its commanders to innovate, to use the seafloor for concealment, the complex thermal layers of the water to baffle sonar, and sheer audacious nerve as their primary defences. They were the underdogs, the terriers sent to hold the line against the wolves, and through hard-won experience in the bloody school of the Mediterranean, they had learned to bite with a ferocity that belied their modest size. Their victories won not by brute force, but by intellect and courage. Within the cramped, sweating, and perpetually humming confines of the U-class submarines, the war was fought in a different dimension, one of heightened senses and nerve-straining silence, a world apart from the vast horizons of the surface fleet. The crew of HMS Unbroken and her sisters like United, Utmost, and Uproar were men living on the edge of a precipice. Their world defined by the groans of stressed metal and the constant, low-grade fear of the deep, a fear that was both a burden and a sharpener of the senses. The smell was a unique, unforgettable cocktail of diesel oil, damp wool, the faint, greasy odour of cooking from the tiny galley, and the ever-present, acrid tang of battery acid, a scent that would permeate their clothes, their skin, and their memories for a lifetime. The signature aroma of their submerged existence. Every creak of the hull, every ping from an enemy warship's sonar that echoed through the pressure hull like a malevolent church bell searching for its congregation, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through the boat, stilling conversations and turning eyes towards the deckhead as if they could see through the steel to the hunter above. They were the ultimate ambush predators, relying entirely on stealth and surprise, knowing that a single mistake, a stray shadow seen from a patrolling aircraft, a trail of bubbles from a leaking valve, or an incautious periscope exposure held a second too long, could mean a one-way trip to the bottom, trapped in a steel coffin as the pressure hull imploded with the force of a massive final fist. Their existence was a relentless cycle of tension and release. The long, boring, claustrophobic hours of patrol, where men read the same book for the 10th time, or wrote letters home they feared would never be sent. The sudden, frenzied chaos of an attack run, where the control room became a temple of focused intensity. The terrifying, depth-charge-shaken silence of the aftermath where men would pray, curse, or simply stare into the dim red light of the control room, waiting for the next explosion that could be the last thing they ever heard. The sound of water rushing in a death knell. They were a band of brothers, isolated from the world above, their only connection to the wider battle, the stream of encrypted messages that flickered across their wireless receiver, a fragile, ethereal thread linking their submerged, metallic world to command and to the fate of the convoy they were sworn to protect, a convoy they often knew only as a collection of coded positions and urgent requests. What no one on the bridge of the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious or the cruiser HMS Nigeria knew, as they scanned the horizon for the first specks of enemy aircraft, was that a screen of these very submarines was already in place, a phantom picket line stretching across the likely approaches, an invisible shield woven from steel, human nerve and priceless intelligence. HMS Unbroken, under the command of the tenacious and brilliantly unorthodox Lieutenant Alistair Mars, a man whose coolness under pressure was legendary, was stationed off the north coast of Sicily, a stone's throw from the enemy's main air and naval bases at Messina and Reggio Calabria. A fox lying in wait within the lion's very den, its periscope a hidden eye watching the enemy's doorstep. HMS United lurked to the south, a silent sentinel in the deep water channels, while Utmost and Uproar patrolled the narrow choke points, their periscopes cutting thin, unnoticed wakes in the calm sea. Their orders were not to attack the convoy directly. That was the job of the Luftwaffe's Stukas and the Regia Marina's surface squadrons. Their mission was far more subtle and far more critical, to act as the convoy's unseen guardians, its early warning system, and its avenging angels. They were to report the sortie of any major Italian naval units, to sink them if a golden chance presented itself, but above all to act as a deterrent, a psychological weapon whose greatest power lay not in the torpedoes they fired, but in the enemy's pervasive, gnawing fear of their potential presence. The mere possibility of their unseen eyes and silent torpedoes would force the enemy to hesitate, to divert precious resources to anti-submarine patrols, to dance to a tune they could not hear, played by conductors hidden in the deep. This was the Magic Carpet Patrol, a strategic concept born of desperation and ingenuity, where the submarine was no longer a lone wolf, but an integral, communicating part of the pack, a key component in a complex, multi-layered defense. But on that first day, August 11th, the hunters became the hunted in a stark, brutal demonstration of the battle's cruel reciprocity and the unforgiving nature of the sea. As the convoy fought off wave after wave of German Stukas and Italian Savoia Marchetti bombers, the skies thick with flak and the screams of diving aircraft. The U-boats were already closing in, their own predatory instincts honed to a fine edge by years of warfare. U-73, commanded by the shrewd and preternaturally patient Kapitänleutnant Helmut Rosenbaum, had slipped through the outer screen with the silent, deadly grace of a stalking panther, his boat a manifestation of his own calculated aggression. The sea is a vast, trackless desert, but for a submariner, the paths of prey are constrained by geography, speed, and tactical doctrine, creating intersections of deadly probability. Rosenbaum, a master of his trade, found one such intersection. He had studied the convoy's likely route, understood its defensive zigzag patterns, and positioned himself not where the fleet was, but where it would be, a predator anticipating the movement of the herd. At 1:15 p.m. as the fleet was maneuvering to launch aircraft, a moment of predictable vulnerability and reduced speed, 4 torpedoes streaked from U-73's bow tubes with a hiss of compressed air and a violent lurch that ran through the entire U-boat. The target was the colossal aircraft carrier HMS Eagle, a veteran of countless Malta runs, a symbol of British resilience and naval tradition, a floating city of over 1,000 souls. The sea, moments before a placid blue, erupted in a series of concussive, hammer-blow detonations against the carrier's port side. The sound, a physical, gut-wrenching blow to every man in the fleet, a sound that signaled irrevocable loss. The old warrior, struck 4 times in as many minutes, took on a terrifying irrevocable list, her flight deck tilting towards the waves in a slow, tragic bow, aircraft sliding off into the water like discarded toys from a capsized cradle. In just 8 minutes, she was gone, the sea swallowing her whole in a vast, churning whirlpool of foam, oil and debris, taking 160 of her crew and, critically, a significant portion of the convoy's precious air cover to the dark, silent bottom. It was a catastrophic opening blow, a stark, chilling reminder that in the Devil's Garden, the threat from the lightless depths was as lethal as the storm from the sun-baked sky above. The loss of the Eagle cast a long, cold shadow over the entire operation, a grim portent of the sacrifices yet to come, a demonstration that the Axis held the home field advantage in this deadly game. The following day, August 12th, brought the battle to a fever pitch, a crescendo of violence that tested the very limits of human endurance and courage, pushing men to the brink of collapse and beyond. The skies were a chaotic scribble of contrails and the black puff-flake bursts of anti-aircraft fire, a mad, impressionistic canvas of modern war, painted with the tools of destruction. The merchant ship Deucalion, her holds packed with munitions, was crippled by a relentless focused air attack, her superstructure a mass of twisted metal, and her insides burning with an inferno that could not be quenched. A funeral pyre visible for miles. The destroyer, HMS Foresight, was struck by a torpedo from an Italian aircraft, the impact tearing a mortal wound in her side, forcing her companions to scuttle her with their own guns. Another name was added to the growing roll of honour and loss. Her crew pulled from the oil-slicked, choking water by their companions, in a display of sombre solidarity that was becoming a grim routine. The air was thick with the acrid, throat-clawing smell of cordite and the metallic taste of fear. The sea littered with expanding oil slicks, flotsam, and the desperate, waving hope of survivors clinging to rafts and wreckage. And through this maelstrom of chaos, the Italian fleet prepared to deliver the coup de grace, to unleash the final, overwhelming blow. From the harbours of Taranto and Messina, the heavy cruisers, Gorizia, Bolzano, and Trieste, magnificent and deadly vessels, supported by a screen of sleek, predatory destroyers, sortied into the open sea, their powerful engines driving them towards the intercept. Their mission was simple and devastating: to intercept the battered convoy under the cover of darkness and tear it to pieces with their massive 8-inch guns, a surface action that would spell certain, swift doom for the remaining merchantmen, a classic naval engagement that the British could not hope to win. It was the moment the entire operation had dreaded, the scenario every admiral had lost sleep over, the nightmare made real. The British surface escorts, brave as they were outgunned and outranged, their courage and their 4-inch and 6-inch guns no match for the overwhelming firepower bearing down on them. On the bridges of the British cruisers and destroyers, a grim, fatalistic acceptance settled over the men, a quiet resolve to sell their lives as dearly as possible. They would fight, but it would be a fight to the death, a sacrificial offering to buy a few more hours, a few more precious miles, for the remaining freighters to stumble towards Malta, their own survival an irrelevant statistic in the cold calculus of strategic necessity. But in that moment of supreme crisis, the seemingly weak, the supposedly limited U-class submarines became the convoy's most potent and decisive weapon, the scalpel that would sever the enemy's thrust. Lieutenant Mars on Unbroken, having intercepted the Italian sighting reports and possessing a mind that could calculate angles, speeds, and human psychology like a chess master, had already plotted their likely course through the Narrows north of Sicily, a mind map of the enemy's intentions laid over the chart in his cramped cabin. He positioned his boat not for a desperate, long-range shot, but for a perfect, close-range ambush, a gambit of breathtaking audacity played out in the pitch-black theatre of the Mediterranean night, where visibility was measured in yards and instinct was as important as instrumentation. He understood he didn't need to sink them outright. He only needed to wound them grievously, to sow doubt and confusion in the mind of the Italian admiral, to break his will to press the attack, to make the cost of aggression seem too high. The night was absolute, a blanket of ink under a sky devoid of moon, the perfect cloak for his purpose, a time when the submarine was truly in its element. On the surface, the Italian squadron was a formation of dark ghosts, their bow waves a faint phosphorescent scar on the black water, their silhouettes barely discernible against the slightly less dark sky. Below, in the pressurized claustrophobic silence of Unbroken's control room, the only sounds were the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the gyroscopes and the steady, measured breathing of the crew, each man holding his post in a ritual of focused tension, their world reduced to the dials in front of them and the calm voice of their captain. The attack periscope broke the surface, a sliver of steel and glass, Mars's single eye to the world above, a cyclops searching for its prey. He saw them, two large, menacing silhouettes, the Bolzano and the Attendolo, perfectly framed in his crosshairs, their profiles unmistakable and beautiful in their lethal promise.
Fire 1! Fire 2! Fire 3! Fire 4!
The command was calm, precise, a testament to a will of iron, the culmination of years of training and the pressure of the moment. The submarine jolted as the torpedoes left their tubes, eels of compressed air and death racing towards their targets at 45 knots, their own internal gyros whirring as they armed themselves. The wait was an eternity compressed into seconds, the only sound the receding whir of the torpedo engines, every man in the boat holding his breath. Then, two found their mark. A colossal orange fireball illuminated the night, a false dawn of violence, as the Bolzano was hit amidships, her engine rooms flooding with the indifferent. Cold sea, power failing instantly, the great ship shuddering to a violent stop. The Attendolo had her entire bow torn off in a grotesque, mangled stump of twisted metal. The forward magazine miraculously not detonating, but leaving her crippled and wallowing, a mortally wounded beast that had lost its head. The Italian admiral, faced with two crippled heavy cruisers, his formation thrown into disarray and panic, and the now certain, terrifying knowledge that the British submarines knew his position and held the absolute advantage in the dark, made the only decision he could. He reversed course, ordering a full retreat back to the safety of the Italian coast. The threat of the surface fleet was neutralized, not by a grand fleet action with thunderous broadsides and towering splashes, but by the calculated surgical strike of a single 500-ton submarine and the unwavering nerve of its commander. The convoy, bleeding and battered but unbowed, had been granted a reprieve. It lived to fight another day, its path momentarily cleared by an unseen hand, its destiny altered by a few well-placed torpedoes in the dark. The tactical doctrine that allowed Unbroken's triumph was a masterpiece of asymmetric warfare, born from the brutal, unyielding necessity of fighting a stronger foe with intelligence, guile, and technology, a paradigm shift in naval thinking. The Magic Carpet patrol line was not a static, rigid wall, but a fluid, intelligent, and adaptive net. Its nodes, the individual submarines whose commanders were given a rare and vital gift: autonomy. Commanders like Mars were trusted to use their initiative and local knowledge to best effect, to be entrepreneurs of violence in their assigned sectors. Crucially, they were the beneficiaries of the priceless ultra-intelligence intercepts, the decoded German and Italian signals from Bletchley Park that gave them a godlike glimpse into the enemy's mind, revealing his intentions, his orders of battle, and his deepest fears, turning the opaque Mediterranean into a transparent chessboard. This allowed them to anticipate enemy movements, positioning themselves not where the enemy was, but where he was going to be, turning their submarines into deadly traps laid hours, sometimes days in advance. They mastered the art of the down-the-throat shot, a terrifying, counterintuitive maneuver where a submarine would turn directly towards an attacking destroyer and fire torpedoes at its bow, a move that often caused the enemy helmsman to steer directly into the path of the oncoming weapon in a moment of panic. A deadly game of chicken played with thousands of tons of warship and the lives of everyone involved. They became experts in using the complex sonic layers of the Mediterranean, diving deep to hide beneath a thermocline, a layer of water with a sudden change in temperature and density that would bend, distort, and ultimately baffle the pinging waves of enemy astic, rendering them invisible and turning the water itself into their protective cloak, a natural ally in their game of hide-and-seek. Their greatest weapon, however, was not the torpedo, but information. Constant, encrypted signals flowed from the submarines to the Admiralty in Alexandria and to the convoy commander, giving the beleaguered fleet a real-time, God's-eye view of the threats converging upon it, turning the opaque, mysterious sea for a few precious days into a transparent chessboard upon which they could see the enemy's moves before he made them, an advantage that was literally worth its weight in gold. The final, agonizing leg of the journey, on August 13th and 14th, was a testament to this sacrifice and strategic ingenuity, a slow-motion parade of pain and determination that pushed men and machines beyond their conceived limits, a saga of sheer willpower. The tanker Ohio, the absolute key to the entire operation, was a floating wreck, her back broken by a near miss that had lifted her bodily from the water, her decks awash, kept from sinking only by the literal, physical support of the lash-to-her-sides destroyers, HMS Penn and Ledbury, a scene of surreal, desperate seamanship that defied all naval textbooks and stood as a monument to human stubbornness. She was the bullseye for every remaining Axis aircraft and submarine, a prize of unimaginable value. Her 11,000 tons of aviation fuel, the difference between Malta's survival and its surrender. Yet the protective umbrella woven by the submarines held firm, their presence a lingering, spectral threat that hampered the enemy's freedom of action. 73S and other U-boats having been harried, chased, and depth-charged by alert escorts who now knew their approximate positions, thanks to the constant stream of sighting reports from the British submarines, were repeatedly unable to line up a clean killing shot, their attacks frustrated by the defensive screen that had been made more effective by the intelligence provided by their own underwater counterparts. The final Italian sortie by light forces was called off. The memory of the crippled Bolzano and Attendolo still fresh and painful, a psychological scar on their operational confidence that outweighed any aggressive impulse. The submarines had inflicted a psychological wound deeper than any torpedo could cause. They had created a zone of perceived danger so vast and omniscient that the enemy's will to engage was fundamentally broken. For the Italian Regia Marina, the loss of 2 heavy cruisers to a single, unseen attacker was a devastating blow to morale and operational doctrine, a confirmation of their deepest fears about the vulnerabilities of their fleet and the skill of their enemy. It created a culture of risk aversion that hampered their effectiveness for the remainder of the war, a victory of the mind that was far more lasting than any sinking. The submarines had achieved a form of strategic paralysis, a victory far beyond the physical damage of their torpedoes, a testament to the power of perception in warfare. And so, on the afternoon of August 15th, what was left of Operation Pedestal, a maimed and scarred collection of hulls that seemed to defy physics and logic by their very existence, limped into the grand harbour of Valletta. The scene was one of biblical deliverance, an outpouring of raw human emotion that transcended the mere metrics of a military victory and touched something primal in the human spirit. The wharves and the ancient, honey-coloured fortifications were lined with thousands of Maltese civilians and British soldiers, their faces etched with the trials of the long siege, their cheers a raw, emotional wave that washed over the shattered, smoke-stained ships, a sound of pure, unadulterated gratitude and salvation that brought hardened sailors to tears. The Ohio, barely afloat, a corpse delivering life, was nudged into port, her precious cargo intact. She had delivered her 11,000 tons of precious aviation fuel. Malta would live. It would fight. It would endure. The arrival of the convoy's remnants was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new, decisive chapter in the history of the Second World War. The fuel from the Ohio allowed the Spitfires and Hurricanes on Malta to once again dominate the skies, rising from their ravaged airfields to strangle the Axis supply convoys to Rommel's Africa Corps, cutting the flow of tanks, petrol, and ammunition that was essential for his survival. The food and ammunition that made it through allowed the island's defenders and citizens to endure, to tighten their belts one more notch, to find the strength to fight on. The victory of Operation Pedestal, paid for so dearly in ships and men, was a genuine turning point, a psychological and material blow from which the Axis in the Mediterranean never fully recovered. It demonstrated that the Royal Navy, though stretched to its absolute limit, could still project power and sustain a besieged outpost even in the face of overwhelming opposition, a message of hope to a weary Britain and a stark warning to its enemies. The legacy of the submarine operations during Pedestal is not one of mere tonnage sunk, though the strategic damage to the Italian cruiser force was significant and lasting, taking 2 potent vessels out of the war for a critical period. Its impact was far more profound and philosophical, echoing in the design of ships and the doctrines of navies for decades to come. It represented a fundamental evolution in the use of the submarine, from a lone commerce raider operating on the strategic fringe to an integrated, vital component of a fleet, a strategic scalpel rather than a blunt instrument, a force multiplier of incredible potency. The success of the U-class in the shallow, dangerous waters around Malta directly influenced the design and doctrine of later British submarines, placing a permanent emphasis on agility, versatility, and the ability to operate in contested littoral spaces, a lesson that remains relevant to this day. Furthermore, the lessons learned in the Mediterranean about coordinated submarine operations, intelligence sharing, and psychological warfare directly informed Allied tactics in the vast expanses of the Pacific, where American submarines would play an equally vital, though different, role in strangling Japan's maritime lifelines. The men of the U-class, from the commanders making split-second decisions in the periscope's eye, to the stokers and telegraphists enduring the heat and the fear, set a standard of professionalism, ingenuity, and daring that became a bedrock of Royal Navy tradition. Their stories passed down as legends. Operation Pedestal was not just a convoy that got through. It was a complex ballet of air, surface and subsurface forces, a symphony of violence and intellect where the smallest, most delicate instrument, the U-class submarine, struck the chord that saved the melody from being silenced forever. More importantly, Operation Pedestal broke the Axis stranglehold on Malta for good. The island, resupplied and rearmed, became a permanent, unsinkable aircraft carrier and a submarine base from which the Allies could savage Rommel's tenuous supply lines across the Mediterranean, directly contributing to his decisive defeat at El Alamein just months later. A pivotal moment that turned the tide of the war in North Africa irrevocably and set the stage for the eventual invasion of southern Europe. The men who crewed those U-class boats, who endured the depth charges, the chlorine gas leaks from battered batteries, the nerve-shredding silence of the hunt, and the crushing weight of command, had not just saved a convoy, they had helped pivot the war in a fundamental way. They proved, with absolute stunning clarity, that in the cold, brutal calculus of modern warfare, the most powerful weapon is not always the largest, but the one wielded with the greatest intelligence, courage, and guile. They were the ghosts in the machine, the unseen architects of a victory snatched from the jaws of annihilation, their story written not in headlines but in the silent, enduring gratitude of an island that refused to die, and in the relentless, turning tide of a world war. In the grand, terrible tapestry of World War II, the thread of their courage is woven deep, a stark and eternal reminder that the tide of history can be turned not only by the thunder of guns and the roar of aircraft, but by the whisper of a periscope breaking the surface of a calm, treacherous sea, and the unwavering will of the men who stood behind it. Men who fought and won in the silent, dark world beneath the waves.